Well, he got to post it first.
Yeah, I'm getting that right now.
Okay.
Wow.
Damn, Andrew, it took forever, and then you're not even gonna be on video.
I know.
Hold on, I'm not on video. Hold on. I'm just trying to get my audio set up. Shit. Hold on, camera's all wrong.
Oh my God.
I just sent you guys a link.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we should have the Brady Bunch. Like, we need 2 more people. I love it.
Eric, is that the link, the live link?
Yep, that's it. I'm gonna post it on Instagram.
Are you putting a link? I already did link in bio.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, but if you wanted to do a swipe up, you can change that.
Yeah.
How do you do that swipe up thing? Is that only for like business pages?
No, you have to have like 13,000 followers or over.
Oh, that's fucked up.
Yeah, it is. All of us who want to share things and like get people directly to content.
Right, my friends want to see my shit too.
Like I found like a bunch of great resource websites with like all the places that still need donations and all of this stuff. And since I can do the swipe up,
yeah,
I can only post one link at a time.
Wow. Okay. Kick it off, bro.
Wait. What?
Oh.
Kick it off. Andrew, you're late, so start the conversation. What's up?
I don't know. Hold on. Do we have a subject? Welcome back to Brandbeats. My name is Andrew. Somebody else go.
Hey, my name is Erwin. Back to Brandbeats. Yeah, so we're gonna, whoever tuned in last week or listened to the podcast, we started having conversations around Black Lives Matter within our organization, even how we are planning to do organizational shifts, but we really were focused on our personal experiences as Black people, as people of color within this industry and just within the world as a whole. And we just wanted to continue that conversation, partially because these are the conversations we would probably have if we were actually able to sit in the office. Like this group specifically, maybe not everybody, but this group specifically would definitely be having these types of conversations. And we would just wanted to continue that on the live. So every Friday, we're just gonna continue this series. And you'll see a different group of faces, just having these discussions and having these talks. I'm just gonna keep on rambling, saying the same shit over and over again. If I pass it off to JoJo, boom.
Why don't you
wait? Let's do the round table.
That's why I pass it off to JoJo. We got to introduce.
I'm JoJo. Thank you.
I'm Lindsay. Gladys.
Eric.
Angel. I think that's everyone, right?
I think we covered it.
Yeah, we covered we covered our PSC, our panel of color. Like, we had to continue this conversation. I do think it's important too, and I'm glad because something that I saw a lot of even conversation about last week too was like, this wasn't a novelty week. It's important to like make sure that the energy around this like maintains until, you know, you start to see some progress and things move in the direction you want. So I think as a testament to what we hope happens out there in culture and in society, it's like, let's continue to talk about those colors and get some different perspectives to the point that Erwin was making. Because I think a lot of people are affected by this in different ways and have had a really different experience related to this subject. And it's an interesting lens through which to look at some of these things. I think, Eric, you were sort of kicking it off last week. It was really interesting, you know, to hear, you know, the subject of that you touched on was, you know, how you have seen bias even within your own culture. And I think that's not the point at anything happening in your culture. I think we all can say that happens within our cultures. but I think it was a really interesting subject that we only lightly touched on. And I was kind of interested to see if like you wanted to expand on any of that experience and how that sort of progressed forward, even maybe in the last week for you. I don't know if you thought about it more.
I mean, so much just to like reflect upon, especially within the past week. And it's actually something that Lindsay and I talked about yesterday. I sent over this like whole dissertation about like anti-Blackness and, you know, the ways we perpetuate it both like implicitly and explicitly and things like that. And just like a whole long like laundry list of things. But there's a lot of resources we can look at. I mean, Hassan Minaj of Patriot Act had this like great episode that he dropped last week, I want to say, just about everything going on. And Dumbfounded, this rapper, he has this podcast called Fun with Dumb, and it's like an all Asian panel. They were just talking about like solidarity and allyship. So it is this very nuanced discussion, and that's what we have, you know, Angel and Gladys on, and Lindsay, of course, just to talk about like what are some other perspectives we can bring in.
Yeah, I think to add to that, you know, like I think there's this misconception in like amongst like non-Black POC that like just because you are a POC yourself, you can't be complicit in acts of anti-Blackness. And I think, you know, in the wake of the last few weeks, I know it's been a reckoning of sorts for all groups of people. And I think I've seen a lot of my own friends have these difficult conversations with their families around, you know, problematic thinking, problematic ideologies, and like, again, ways that they've been complicit in racism, you know, towards Black people. And these are people that haven't really spoken up before. So I think it's all really good dialogue coming out of the last few weeks. And hopefully, like, you know, as Andrew was saying, like, hopefully this is something that continues moving forward. It's not just a one-time thing. You know, being anti-racist is not a checkbox. It's not something you can do by simply reading a book, 2 books, having a couple of conversations. I think it's something we need to actively always assess in ourselves, in our thinking, in our actions, and it's an ongoing thing that we have to do.
Totally agree. I mean, I think that's really insightful, and I think that's something that a lot of people are probably just bringing to light right now. And I think that's like adding to the collective stress that like all people are experiencing is this sudden realization that we're all capable of bias, and probably all guilty of it in some way, shape, or form. Maybe like you look back on your life and you're like, things that I've said and I've done probably treaded on some really sensitive ground for people, even if I didn't intend anything on it. And it's uncomfortable to think about, like, because especially when you're a person of color and you've been the victim of it, because you know how that feels. And so to think that you have made somebody else feel that way is like incredibly painful, and it's tough to deal with right now. On top of everything, to be, you know, I think it does compel a lot more people to get involved with what we're seeing right now. But yeah, I think it's just one of those other an additional sort of conflicting thought that we all have to sort of go through, because many of us walk around, myself included, like for a long time in our lives thinking, I'm kind of incapable. You know, I literally thought it when one of my friends, like, I'm kind of incapable of like bias in some ways because I'm like biracial. And I'm like, well, that's not true at all. Like, there's basically 99% of cultures out there I don't know or experience, and I don't really understand deeply. And you have to sort of retrain your brain to like remember that. I think it's like a good point to like remember that regularly, that most people you don't understand. And so probably what you think about them might be wrong, and you should be sensitive to the things and to the things that you say to them.
Yeah, I think this is a lot of times that I think we all are reflecting of how, like, what has happened to us as individuals, but, you know, what we may have inflicted, like Andrew said, on others. I remember like the the physical check for me that I realized that we are all biased and hold prejudice against people is I went to the Museum of Tolerance, I think as like a teenager in high school or maybe, you know, early 20s. And one of the things that you do when you walk in there, they show you two doors, like, are you prejudiced? You're not prejudiced. And they're like, okay, well, if you're not, try and walk through the not prejudiced door, the not prejudiced door. And I remember a man walked up to it and he was like tugging on that door. And the guy was like, that's the point. Like, there's no person on this planet who hasn't had a moment where someone was prejudiced against them or vice versa. And I like that has stuck with me my entire life. I'm like, oh shit. We've all done it in various forms, received it, done it. Yeah, that was just a really physical check for me. That's always stuck with me.
I think an important distinction to make is the difference between racism and prejudice, right? And I think everyone here is a POC, and like by the definition of racism, we actually can't be racist because racism is institutionalized prejudice, right? It's prejudice. It's prejudice that's propped up and supported and carried out by like structures and institutions in our society. So, but that is not to say that we can't, like to Lindsay's point, like be prejudiced ourselves, right? Like I think that is it's a very fine nuance, but it's an important one. And like I think the way that those prejudices manifest themselves in other like non-Black POC communities is through colorism, right? And like I think that's absolutely a thing in the Chinese and Chinese American communities, and I think it's something that, like, you know, growing up, like I was born in China, but like I grew up in America, and so like when I would go back to the motherland for summer vacation or whatever, you know, I would have my California tan and like would be teased for it and like be picked on for being dark. And by no means was I like dark, you know. And it's like there's such a stigma against like having darker skin in like Chinese society. And like I can't speak to other POC cultures, but like in Chinese culture, like skin color is related to class, you know. And so like I think the prejudice that it takes on in the Chinese community has to do with that. And you know, I'm sure there are variations of that in other cultures too.
For sure, yeah. I mean, I was also talking to this with Lindsay as well, but that's super prevalent in Filipino culture. Like, if you go back to the Philippines, you watch TV, the most successful like celebrities and actors, they call them mestizos, which means like they're mixed with like Chinese or Spanish or whatever, and they're all like light-skinned Filipinos. And that doesn't represent a majority of Filipinos, which are fairly tan, you know. And it's just like it's something that I think is so ingrained in culture. Like when I go back home and see my family, my mom's always like, "Oh my God, you've gotten so dark," you know. It's just like this like internalized thing, but it's like that's perpetuating like the white supremacy. That's perpetuating this idea that lighter is better, which isn't the case, you know. And again, it is a class thing, but definitely like also an internalized racism thing, you know. And even if you look at billboards in the Philippines, we have like a whitening soap, and it's like that's so crazy to me that that's a product, a soap to make your skin lighter. Like, I don't know, it's crazy. But it is definitely a discussion that should be had, especially because as we touch on like solidarity and allyship with non-POCs in the Black community, it's like, how do we navigate these structures that we have with our cultures, you know?
That's I think that's also in the Latino community. You know, we have a lot of Afro-Latinos. We have Afro-Mexicans, we have Afro-Guatemalans. It's everywhere in the Latino community. And I mean, I can only speak for the Mexican and Guatemalan communities because that's who I am. But we've been taught to erase our identity. And I say this as a person with privilege. I am a light-skinned Mexican. And we've been taught to shame our indigenous people. We've been taught to tell them that they're ugly. We've been taught that dark is ugly, and it's something that I grew up hearing from a lot of family, you know, saying that to other family members, like, we are the same family, but just because you're darker, you know, you get made fun of. And I watched this video where they asked Mexican children, they put two baby dolls in front of them, and they asked them questions like, which one's the good one, which one's the bad one, which one's the pretty one, which one's the ugly one. And they're all brown. They are all indigenous children, and they always pick the lighter baby. And it's something that we as Latinos need to address. We want people to stand by us when there's ICE raids happening and all these children in the camps, but we have such a hard time standing with our Black brothers and sisters when because of the bias against darker skin. And that's something that I've been having conversations about with my parents. I'm planning on talking to my husband's nieces and nephew, because this is from a young age, you know, like, teach the children so the children can carry on what we're doing.
I think going in a little bit further and only speaking from my experience, trying to figure out like where that comes from. And yeah, it's easy to like have that the conversation amongst each other, but digging a little bit further to realize like for Black people specifically, it came from like obviously like the European standard and like slavery and like, you know, having like the Blacks in the house and then the slaves, you know, outside. And it's kind of like what's been embedded in us from the beginning, which has trickled down to our new, like our current society. And I think for me, where I struggle is because I don't consider myself light skin or dark skin. I've considered myself brown, but there's no brown. It's you, like, you're either this or you're either that. And so I kind of grew up struggling because I didn't associate as either one group just completely didn't like me and like the other group didn't either. And, you know, I realized that being brown skin or not completely dark skin, that I do still have my like social advantages because people will see me as a little bit more friendlier than someone who's darker than me. But at the same time, it's like, it's kind of like a war amongst ourselves. And that all, I guess, when I was, I was doing some research and I was like listening to different women speak and podcasts, and I was kind of digging into articles, and I was seeing like mixed marriages within the Black community isn't that prominent, right? But there's still a reason why, you know, men choose lighter skinned women than darker skinned women, or why like heavier dark skinned men report the highest level of microaggressions than someone who's lighter skinned and like bigger. So I think as we kind of try to have these conversations, like digging into more of like, why is that? Like, why do we feel this way? Why do I sometimes feel like someone who's darker than me is going to like attack me or be mean to me versus someone who's a lighter complexion?
I share that sentiment, Jojo, from the light skin side. Like, I was attacked a lot when I was in high school. Like, girls used to pull my hair, tease me all the time, but I didn't care. Like, I'm very proud of my skin tone for a very specific reason. Like, my grandparents grew up a couple miles from each other in South Bend, Indiana. My grandfather is Black, my grandmother is white. And in the 70s, they defied everybody. They were like, we love each other, we're getting married. My grandmother never saw her mother again because her father told her, great, get married, don't come home. She never saw her mother again. She saw her father, I think, when she was in her 50s. Short time, you know, he died later. And if my grandparents didn't defy social norms, like, I would not be here, my mother would not be here. So like, okay, I'm light skinned, but my grandparents stood up for something that nobody was okay with, not even their own families. And like, and I owe them everything because they said, fuck it, we love each other.
Yeah. I have the exact same experience. I went through the same thing as you, Lindsay, where I had a conversation with my dad this weekend, and my dad is like Czech German, is white, green eyes, blonde hair, is, you know, as white can be. And my mom is 110% Black. But so I come in on my 23andMe at 55-45. Okay, but like 55 West African. But my dad was estranged from his parents for 30 years. I met my grandparents when I was 28 years old. They disowned him at 17 for wanting to be with a Black person. And my dad decided that he didn't want to live like that. He embraced my mom's family, lived for a long time like that. And he has a lot of pain in his life for it. And I'm so proud of my dad for being able to do that and being able to step away from that. He moved to California because where they grew up in Cleveland, there was a lot of racism. And he's like, I don't want you to grow up around that. And so for that reason, I'm incredibly proud of my family's diligence in willingness to sort of fight against that mentality, and stand for the right thing. And it's kind of like a wild experience to be much like you are, like the result of a interracial sort of family life that especially was frowned upon, and in like a deeply sort of painful way. And I'm truly at the end of the day, I'm proud of that. I think that's ultimately a good thing. But I also know there are sometimes in those communities where people see interracial marriage as a symptom, or I won't even call it a symptom. Sometimes they will see it's frowned upon because people feel like, oh, you choose to be with a person of a different color because you don't think the people of your own color are good enough. And those are two hard thoughts to hold at the same time in my mind, because I'm like, well, no, what we want is people to see each other as the same, and I guess what's the word? Basically not willing, but worthy of your love, regardless of their race, creed, color, and whoever they may be. And yet at the same time, we have to hold that same thought in our head, is well, why do you want that other person? Is it because you think that people of your own color aren't good enough? Mm-hmm. And those are two weird thoughts that I don't know how do you hold them both at the same time? Because they're both real at the same time, And I don't think that one or the other is wrong, but you do need to be deeply reflective about and know yourself. What are your motivations and why? And why do you love this person and all of that, and really explore those things, but be open to the fact that love can sort of come from anywhere, and anybody's worthy of it at the same time.
I think the flip side of that is true too, right? Those of us in an interracial relationship, I'm married to a white man, but it's there's a lot of I'm going to fuck up this word, fetishization of POC, right? Whether it's people only dating Black people, or only Asians, and yellow fever and all that. It's it's a fucking red flag, right? And it's I don't think I intentionally married who I married because I need to be close to whiteness. I need to marry a white man, right? Even though that is absolutely a mentality that the Chinese community holds. But that wasn't my decision. But on the flip side of that, it's really important to evaluate your partner's motivations in being with you too, right? I'm the first Asian person that Will dated and eventually married, right? So it's he didn't have a pattern of being with Asian women, because to me that would have been a red flag. And so to your point about evaluating your own intentions, your own kind of potentially internalized view or hatred, self-hatred potentially, all of these things I think factor into whether you're assessing, you know, your partners, whether you're assessing yourself. It's like it comes down to kind of the crux of the discussion today of like, how are we kind of looking inward at ourselves in all of this?
Yeah, and that is that is an incredibly hard thing to do. Like somebody who knows themselves so well to be able to make those distinctions and really like clearly understand that about themselves, like more power to you, because you are really on top of your shit. Because like there's some stuff that just makes us who we are that who knows, you know what I mean? Like there's sometimes it's just the things we walk around in life and it's like, that's just how I feel. You know, it's not, I think that there could be, you know, not inappropriate, but there could be motivations that you should get to the bottom of and reflect on yourself. But at the same time, you have to respect how you feel, you know, and that's okay. But it is important to really, like, I guess, investigate, like get curious about why, like you said, patterns. Like what patterns do you have, and why are those my patterns, right? And the same could be said for biases that you hold in a negative light towards people. Like, why do I think, like, if you get curious about like, why the hell do I think that, that's how you start to uncover. That's always been when people get enlightened, is like, I need to question the nature of like my own thought process, whatever it is, whether you think it's good or bad or whatever. It comes back to what you were saying about just always being aware that maybe there could be some deeper flaw in your thought process than you're aware of, and like constantly reminding yourself to like have that experience and like stop and pause and do those things.
But you also, in my opinion, have to think about, I think for me, growing up into like predominantly Black neighborhoods, think about like social status as well and what's associated to that. And again, like speaking specifically towards like Black men, you know, what is seen as level of success, and it's usually like white women or mixed women or Asian women, or, you know, just someone who's like not Black, because we're considered like angry, aggressive or whatever. And like, I think for me, when I grew up in these places that were predominantly Black, like dating in my race was like normal. But like my experience in San Francisco when I first moved there, like I could not get a Black guy to date me for the life of me. Like it was hard. And I was just like, yo, like, what is wrong with me? Like, why is this way? And, you know, that was the first time I actually seen a lot of biracial like babies, or like a lot of like, you know, different couples together. And I just didn't understand it at first. And I couldn't understand like why I wasn't desired, because I had never seen so many like different types of like ethnicities. And even talking to a lot of Black men, again, like that was the first time being in San Francisco, I realized, I'm like, oh, okay, well, maybe because I'm not supportive enough. You know, you start to like build up this self-doubt. I was like, oh, I'm not light skinned, so maybe that's why. And that was like my first experience actually dating outside of my race, where I got to know other like ethnicities. One of my first boyfriends was a Salvadorian, and he was a light-skinned Salvadorian, and seeing how his family like at the beginning had an issue with like accepting me. But I think that's something to dive deeper into. It's like, one, like what is socially like acceptable? Like, you know, again, I typically have dated like lighter skinned men. And like when I do try to date darker skinned men, they don't typically go for someone like me. Again, I don't know why, but these are the things that I try to like dissect a little bit more into too, as like looking inside and out.
Yeah, that's something that's very present in the Latino community too. Not just like Eric said, oh, you can't date a Black man, but bring home an indigenous looking man when you're light skinned. Like I've been through it. My husband's indigenous, he's brown, I'm proud. And it's just, there's this saying that I've heard throughout my childhood, which is, and I'll say it in Spanish, mejorar la raza, which means to better the race. And like saying that just angers me so much, because like what does that even mean? Like it's this Spanish European ideal that's been placed in our heads to erase who we are. There's obviously clearly indigenous people still out there, but they don't matter. they're not counted, they're not accounted for. There's still land seizures, there's still all these things, and it's just the Spanish ideal to take away what the indigenous people had in the beginning. It's just, and I've heard it in my relationship with my husband. Wow, you're so pretty. Why are you dating him? And it's like, well, why am I pretty? Oh, well, you're so light skinned. And it's like, it fucks me up mentally because I didn't notice that he was dark. Like that's not what I liked him for. Like I liked him for who he was. And now I have to think about, oh, like, is it wrong that I'm dating someone that's darker? Like, it's a full mental thing to have to process when you get told to better your race.
Why do you think, I mean, like, why do you think like we have a tendency, like, look, it's obviously a tendency within a lot of cultures, right? Like what is the idealism or idolism? Like, why do we have that tendency? I was listening to like, I was listening to Frederick Douglass's autobiography, and he was just even talking about the fact that like slaves, when slaves would have masters, they would fight with one another when they would come across slaves in town from a different master, and they would have physical fights about whose master was better or richer or poor. And it was frowned upon. It was like, it was bad enough to be a slave of a brutal master, but it was the worst of the worst to be a slave of a poor master. And so they would identify with their slave owners regardless of the situation, and still think that they needed to create some sort of tribal idealism within their own community against one another. Like, why is that like sort of our tendency as like humans to want to organize that way? It's like such an us versus them, but with no brotherhood sort of really like considered.
It's survivalism, right? Like I think the act of categorizing and like compartmentalizing is a way to assess danger, a way to assess like the best decision to make in the moment to like protect yourselves, right? And so like in the scenario you're describing, it does sound like you end up siding with the oppressor because that's your greatest chance of surviving, right? Your greatest chance of making it. And like it's fucked. And like I think in like assessing a lot of like the Chinese American community as well as Asian American communities at large, like, you know, in a lot of ways, like we've been pitted against Black people, right? Whether it's, you know, being called a model minority. It's not like people know this, but I think it's important to reiterate that it's like, it's not a fucking compliment, right? And like the idea of a model minority is based on these like assumptions or like stereotypes of like, oh, like, you know, Asian Americans are hardworking and like, you know, just like have strong family values. And like this shit is used in stark contrast against Black people. This is an ideology and terminology used used against Black people to be like, well, if one minority can do it, why can't you? Right? Like they faced adversity too. They're marginalized. Like if they can do it, why can't you? And it's like it's a fallacy. It's a false equivalence, because it's like my experience as a Chinese American is absolutely not the same as like Black people in America. And like while we have all faced discrimination, racism, and prejudice, like to try and equate those things, it's not the fucking same.
100%. Yeah. And this is even a topic where like we talk about, you know, at the beginning of COVID, how there were attacks against Asians in the country. And I know I've heard like a lot of Asians being like, well, Black people weren't there for us when we were attacked. Why should we be there for them now? But that's such a fucked up way of thinking, you know, like why does that even matter, first of all? And secondly, like I said last episode, me as an Asian American, like I wouldn't even be here if not for the work of Black leaders and activists. So it's like we owe it to them. And again, as human beings, like that's just, you know, we should stand in solidarity. It just makes sense. So the whole model minority thing, like it's a very malicious thing, I think, to weaponize Asians against Black people, and like it's I don't fuck with it at all. And also I don't fit into the stereotype because I'm not good at math. I'm not like, I guess I'm quiet, but I'm not very submissive or anything. So
no, and like two points from that, right? Like I think model minorities used to apply to Asian Americans as a whole, but it's inaccurate to do so, because like the experiences of all the kind of racial groups under Asian is vastly different, and like the image that is conjured when people think about model minority, it's typically East Asian, right? Like the white people of Asia, like the fairer skinned population in that list of countries. And like there's actually huge discrepancies in wealth and like education and opportunities within Asian like minority groups. And so it's not even fair to say, right, like like all Asians benefit from like whatever systems. But like on the flip side of what we were just talking about, like I think for a lot of East Asians, our proximity to whiteness, which I mentioned before, whether that's by way of, you know, who we married, by way of like our skin color, like being fair skinned, like that, it's insidious. Like it you know, that proximity has afforded us privileges and benefits, right? So we've been able to excel and succeed. And again, that is not to discredit or say that we haven't faced, you know, prejudices and like acts of violence or like racism, but it is to say that we've been afforded opportunities that others haven't. And when you taste success, when you get a taste of privilege and like the benefits of that, it's fucking hard to let go. And like to me, I think that is why like in a lot of Asian American communities, I think that term applies in this situation, but like in those communities, when you have a tiny taste of like success and privilege, it's hard to let that go. And that's why like in in history and in recent history, like it's like Asian Americans, and I'm going to say Chinese Americans, like have not spoken up for like other POC, especially like Black POC and Indigenous POC, because they want to keep their heads down. They want to hold on to that privilege as much as they can.
It's interesting to learn about things that are just outside of, you know, Black culture. Like I started asking Eric a lot of questions last night. I was like, there are things that I clearly don't know about. And I started to really wrap my head around the fact last week that, and I said it to a couple of you, like, I think a lot of people assume because we are people of color, we all understand and have gone through the same or similar struggles. So we're just aware of what other people have gone through. And I didn't even know that model minority was a term until I watched the documentary LA 92 over the weekend. And I mean, to see what happened, like I walked into that documentary, it was like fully going into Rodney King, what happened with that. And then understanding, you know, there was an Asian woman who shot a Black girl, and then that trial, and then what like a awful divide like that took a hold of the two communities. And they take part in that documentary talking about like Asian Americans and them really trying to speak up after that happened to try to be there for African Americans, and then it just really fell flat. And like that's when I started thinking, I was like, I didn't even know this was going on, and I felt guilty myself for not knowing. I don't know. I don't even know why I brought that up. Like, I just, there's so much more to learn that I don't know what's going on sometimes outside of my own community. And it's just really heartbreaking at times.
Yeah. No,
I
I
think.
mean, oh, sorry, go ahead, Jojo. No, go ahead.
No, I was just touching on Lindsay, or just like, again, even in my own community, again, because I'm Black, I'm mixed,
All
so I only know how to like represent this one race. And so when I speak, I'm speaking on behalf of myself and like what I know. And so even just looking at like Andrew, Erwin, and Lindsay, like they're biracial. And in the beginning, I'm just like, oh, we're just all gonna band together and just like be towards this movement. But I had a conversation with Andrew. It's like I never really acknowledged the other side of you guys. Like I never acknowledged like you have a whole nother like side of your family that, you know, you might have to have hard conversations with, or you kind of grew up like thinking a certain way. And I just, again, like all I knew was just like being pro-Black. And so even being a Black person, there's so many layers of us that like we have to like learn and like touch on and kind of like understand, as well as other like people of color.
Yeah, I mean, it's a sad truth. It's like we can't have the expectation of ourselves to know all experiences. It's impossible, right? Like what we can do is operate with the knowledge that we don't know, and like and sort of act accordingly. That you can't necessarily you can't empathize with everybody. You can sympathize, but you can't like empathize with everybody's experience in some ways. Like even when it comes down to like my identity, I was talking to Lindsay about this before. I was like, I don't even call myself Black. You know, like I call myself like I'm mixed. Like I'm a unique, different experience. Like I am a mixed individual, mulatto. Like it's a unique, different experience in America because I've been embraced and rejected by both, or at least I wouldn't even say that. I'll say like I felt embraced or felt rejected by both of the predominant races that sort of make me up in many ways. And some of that is just the nature of like the experience that I've had, where I've grown up, the culture that I grew up around predominantly. I think it would be really hard, like to your point, Lindsay, it's like I feel embarrassed like whenever I learn something new. Like you learn about the Asian American experience or the Hispanic experience or whatever. Like there's so much to know that I don't even, it's dizzying at times. And I think that's what a lot of people are going through right now, where it's like, well, I never educated myself on sort of the Black experience in America. And it's an important thing to do, to at least like, to try and understand. You're never going to be an expert on it. Like that's impossible. Unless you lived it, you're not going to be an expert on it. But I think like the least you can do is recognize that you don't know, that you, and that it would probably go a really long way to try and put yourself in the shoes, or at least understand what they may have been through, so that you can be a support system for that individual or that culture, and then celebrate that culture at the same time. You know, like I think that's the other piece of it, is like, it's not about supremacy, but it's about celebration of like what those cultures have and are, and embracing them. Even Eric, as you talk about, so much of your upbringing was sort of inspired by Black culture in many ways. There's probably a dozen other cultures too that are sitting in there that also influence you, but you just you probably still don't have any idea like how the sausage was made, so to speak. But it's there's a weird way to use that phrase. but like it is good to dig into those things and get curious about them, and then understand, like you have a conversation with Gladys to understand a little bit more about her culture, and it's like you can have a sympathetic conversation with her, and then hold some space for Gladys to go through what she's going through. And I think that's so much of the conversation right now in America, is it's being brought to the attention that like the volume's being turned up on a problem many people who never really took the time to educate themselves around this need to do that so that they can have an intelligent opinion or conversation or perspective on what the world should maybe look like versus what they thought it looked like.
100%, yeah. And you and Lizzie talk about education, and as you mentioned, you know, a lot of my lens of like popular culture in America comes from Black culture. And there's actually a famous comedian, Jimmy O Yang. He immigrated from China, and the way he learned English was through watching like BET Rhapsody, you know. So for a lot of Asian Americans, I think the way we consume and like experience American culture is through Black culture. That's like our lens. But I think the least we can do is like learn Black history. You know, like for me, a good portion of my childhood was like I just grew up loving hip hop. You know, like the like 4 elements of hip hop. You know, rap, DJing, breakdancing, graffiti, all that. So I decided to like look into it. Now I was a student of the game. Looked up the history, looked up like everything. So I think as we're talking about Black Lives Matter, as we're talking about pretty much any of the Black accomplishments that, you know, we as Asian Americans specifically like love, let's dig into the history. Let's educate ourselves a little bit, because there are definitely a lot of things before this I didn't even know. You know, I didn't really know the work of Marcus Garvey. I didn't really know the work of like Huey P. Newton and stuff. So I think that's the least we could do, is just like enlighten ourselves a little bit, so we can have these like nuanced discussions.
Might sound a little angry of me, but it doesn't matter. Like we all need to continue to educate ourselves. Everybody right now, like Erwin said, you are not getting away from this. We are on lockdown. You're not getting away from this. And Jojo said it last week. Like in school, we got a chapter. We got a chapter on Black history. Yeah, they might have floated us a month, and we learned about.
Floated us a month.
Sorry.
Did you say they gave us a month? It was a leap year. Did you say they gave us a month?
And they gave us a shortest month. So we learned this much about our own culture. And I just listened to a podcast, 1619. It was so good. And I remember this happening to me in school. And Andrew, Erwin, I'm sure you went through this too. They're like, okay, we're going to do a project on where you came from. Talk to me, like do a project on your ancestors.
Mm-hmm.
Where'd I come from? I'm from America. That's where I came from. I can't trace nothing back. Thank you for 23andMe. Now I can see the countries I came from. But back then, looking at my teacher, I'm like, I don't know, America? Like, sure. Like it's just, we had no proper like way of knowing anything about our history. But right now, with people educating themselves, stop telling me you're educating them yourself. Just continue to learn. You do not have to come to me every other day, every couple days, whatever, telling me like, oh, like I'm learning, I'm educating myself. Great. That is fantastic.
I'd rather talk about like, what did you learn?
What did you learn?
Like, let's have a conversation about all of these great things that you've learned about my culture, because that's what I want to talk about.
You might teach me something that I don't know about my own culture. Like, don't just tell me that you're learning. Let's talk about what it is that you're learning.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been driving me crazy.
That's like been the most inspiring, but also the hardest thing is people want to just like analyze the top surface of what's happening and then never want to dive deeper to see the why. And then anytime you try and like bring up the why, they're like, conspiracy, that's too much. These are the same people who then go on to believe like Barack Obama was involved in like human sex trafficking. Like it's the same person who develops this complex like ecosystem of crazy ass theories that can't believe the deeper level whys of like redlining or the birth of a nation starting to criminalize Black men and all of this other stuff. Like they can't believe that. And those are the things I would love for people to dive into, like you're saying, and just continue to educate yourself. And then that's when I want to have conversations. And for me, I'm like, that's like the safe space. It's not for you to come ask me about things, but it's literally like, tell me what you learned and we can dig deeper together. Because you're right, like even in this time, I'm learning new shit, right? Like I thought I knew a lot because I grew up and my parents like gave me a bunch of books on like Black people because they knew I wasn't learning it in school. But like even during this time, like watching documentaries, reading additional stuff, even stuff that non-Black people are posting, I'm like digging into it and going like, oh shit, I didn't know this. And that's like, to me, like, we don't even get that during Black History Month. During Black History Month, we literally talk about MLK and the same Black people over and over and over again.
Rosa Parks.
Yeah. It's like you hit the check marks and you're like, all right, we talked about all those Black people. Let's move on. Let's go on with the rest of our year. But like now it's like, it's inspiring seeing people like actually dig in and learn, but then also those people who don't, that's like the hardest part for me.
But in addition to that comment, and even for myself, where it's like we're kind of in this social media overload where like at first I was just like posting content like, oh my God, we're great. Like this person said this, so we're great. Like it's actually like getting outside of social media and like actually doing the research. And I think that's again where it's like a lot of people are like, oh, I'm learning from you. I'm like, why? Because you follow me on Instagram.
Mm-hmm.
Like I posted something about Pornhub celebrating Black. Anyway, but it wasn't real. But it wasn't real, and I had to like go in like myself, and I'm like, oh, I may have misinformed some of my followers. It's like, don't just like learn from me, okay? Like do the research, and the same thing with movies. They're like, oh,
actually, really quick, that's important to just touch on. Like, since we feel as Black people like we know certain things, even though I feel like we don't know everything, obviously. Like, since we feel like we know certain things, we'll just like quickly reshare certain things without actually like fact checking and digging deeper. And these should be opportunities. Anytime we see it, we should be digging deeper into our own culture to make sure, or just to learn more. So we don't post things like, what was it? You thought it was like Black porn? Black porn promo?
But I think was like the #2 movie on Netflix. I'm like, are you fucking The Help? Like all the documentaries that you could be watching on Netflix, #2 is The Help.
I'm like 13 should be the first. Yeah, you're watching Django to learn shit. They're just like, what's something Black?
I know, what's something Black? I was like, it's not even a Black director.
But don't you feel like, I mean, like to something Lindsay was just saying before though, like, isn't it more like, there's no end goal. Like, it's not just learn this thing. It's not pick up a book or two. Mm-hmm. It's like, it's this, the purpose of like, the way you fight racism and bias is like changing the way you think and the way you live. And it's not that like, I think so much people like in the world we live in today, they're like, oh, cool, I'll just read a couple books and like, now I understand. Well, no, you don't. And also like there's too much to ever learn. So you need to just change the way you live and operate so that when you don't understand people, you can have a way of appreciating them and their culture rather than compartmentalizing and trying to like shortcut them. So like to the point Lindsay's making, it's like, there's a ton of things like you were even talking about this last week, Jojo, like I can't tell you what books to like solve. You're not going to understand. I want you to change the way you think and live your life so that you're more open and then can operate in a way that will respect the rest of the world and create a world that we can live in that like, that's just the operating model. It's not like, there's just not like there's not some end zone. You know what I mean? Like there is like, there's just a way of thinking that needs to change. And it's beyond just Black culture. It's like, well, great. Like carry that to Asian culture, carry that to Latino culture, carry that to like, everybody you don't understand in the way that you approach them, in the way that you speak to them, in the way that you judge the way that, or the way that you sort of process the way that they're experiencing life. And that's like the only way we get to a place where it's an even playing field. And unfortunately, like we live in this space right now where it's like, people just want answers. And I'm like, there's not really answers. Like we have to change the way people like do and operate in the world that they sort of live in today.
Yeah. And that's kind of something I'm curious about too, is just from a non-Black person, like there's this talk about, performative allyship versus like actual allyship. And, this brings to mind like the Black squares on Instagram and the politicians like kneeling and wearing those like kente cloths or whatever. So like, and this is probably like a long conversation to be had, but like, how do we navigate those differences? Like, I think it's like between like showing your woke versus actually doing shit. You know what I mean?
You don't have to wear a kente cloth.
That's a start. Yeah.
Thank you.
I think you hit on the key, Eric, which is action, right?
Mhm.
Like performative allyship and activism is just speaking,
Mhm.
or posting a black square or wearing a kente cloth for a photo op, right? But like really turning around and implementing policies, or like going right back to your beliefs. And like something I said earlier in the podcast, and like to what Andrew was just saying, is like it's ongoing work. It's continuously assessing yourself, continually like learning and unlearning certain things. And it's like that work, there's no like goal post for that stuff.
Yeah.
It's like it's having a baseline understanding of all the different things at play in kind of the experience of Black people in America, and like having that baseline to be able to have these conversations with like your Black friends, Black family members, whatever, right? And that's the beginning. that's the start of all of that. And so like I think that's how you tell the difference between performance and actually like actual change and true like allyship or working towards that.
Yeah, and I think about that great scene in Get Out where the white dad is like, "Yeah, I voted for Obama twice," and someone said this before. I forgot which podcast, but it's not enough to be not racist. Like just because you vote for Obama doesn't make you not racist. You have to be actively anti-racist. And like, I guess the discussion now is like, how can we take steps to do that? And it's by being active, getting out there.
I think one conversation. Well, this woman, and she was on Instagram, and she was having a speech, and it kind of changed my whole perspective on like having these hard conversations with like white people or like privileged people or white supremacy. Was like she was like I can't remember her name, Hillary or something, but there's a video of her having this conversation with her parents, like putting out data and logistics of like why Black people are impoverished, why we're this, why we're that, and like why you're wrong. And she was just like, she was a little kid arguing with her parents, and like we appreciate that. But the real issue is like, why do y'all feel like y'all can have a conversation about like what we deserve or where we need to be or why we're here? She's like, what you need to do is have a conversation of why you feel that you can have this conversation, like why white supremacy is a thing and we are placed inside of it. And why do you personally feel as a white person that like, you can kind of dictate of how we all move, where we all deserve, why we're the bad people, when ultimately, if it's up to you, how can you change that narrative? You know what I mean? Like look inside yourself. And I posted things and kind of in regards to just like white people being like having this hard conversation and things like that. But it's like, it should not be about us. It should be about y'all. And if there, like you guys said, there's a lot of things to learn. There's a lot of history there. And you're not going to learn it in a week, not 2 weeks, not throughout this whole fucking movement. You're not going to learn about any of us in that time. But you can kind of dissect your own privilege. You can kind of dissect like why you feel this way, or like, why you don't think that looting is bad. Like, like things like that. It's like, I said it before, like you will only associate to things that affect you personally. And if Black people being killed doesn't affect you personally, then talk about the things that does. And that is white privilege. And I think like that's a good start. For me, that's your starting place. And then from there, you can kind of unravel on a little bit more of the topics of like, all right, well, I know I'm privileged because of this, or like I have the, the social status of this. And then like, how can I help? Because ultimately, like we need your help. I would like for you to get to know me. I would like to say that my friends know me as a Black person. I have white friends or just other friends, but like, that doesn't mean that you'll root for me, that you'll protect me. But like, if you dig a little bit deeper into yourself, then maybe you can kind of shield me, which is to me where I think a lot of this conversation should, like literally that changed me, but like that's where a lot of this conversation should start.
I think that's a great point in like investigating where this idea of whiteness as pure, as like powerful and mighty and as like the default comes from. And like that's something that I've been trying to find time to dig into too. And like most of this world has been colonized and like conquered in some way, shape, or form by your Europe. And so like, you know, that I'm sure is part of it, right? And like spreading those types of ideals, but like I don't think that still answers the question for me. And like you know, Will was telling me about a podcast he was listening to about like when the term white was actually developed or came about to designate race, right? Because like there was a period of time where that wasn't, right? And like it in American history, I don't have the exact facts, so I need to fact check this afterwards, but like the term white as it relates to race came about in American history at a time where they were creating policy that would have allowed everyone certain rights if they didn't create that distinction. And so like, you know, it was defined what race white was, and like that was actually put into place. So again, like there's so much to trace back, right? And like I think that's part of the work that needs to be done too, right? Yeah. Evaluating not just your culture, your community, but like where the fuck do these ideas come from? Why are we all internalizing them?
Because literally I feel like we're all on this call and having these conversations on being like basically the breakdown of what is it to be like light versus dark, which is like white versus black, or like white versus like Latino, you know, like it's all basing upon like what you're saying. It's kind of like this law that they built against us. It's like, how do we separate ourselves as a class against everyone else that's darker than us? And how do we like leave them as like, you know, people without privilege or without rights, you know? I mean, I didn't know that. So thank you.
And just for the record, it's not enough to acknowledge that you have white privilege. Like Jojo said, like you need to follow that sentence up. I acknowledge my white privilege. Here's what I want to do to help. And I feel like right now I'm seeing a lot of flooding of like, I acknowledge my white privilege. Like I acknowledge I have white privilege. Like, okay, that's the first step. You acknowledge it, but there's a whole part of that sentence that is not being said right now. Like, what are you going to do to help change? Stand up, be out here with us.
And leave out the butts.
No.
I fucking hate the butts. I hate the butts. Leave out the butts. I'm white, but I have privilege, but like leave that shit out. I don't want to hear that. Like, I might be a little bit racist, but I think everyone no, leave that out. Like, sorry.
Yeah, it's just like improv. It's not a but, it's a yes and, you know?
Yeah. I would say but always negates the first part of the sentence.
Mm-hmm.
Always.
Yeah.
I think we're starting to see those sentiments like being expressed by like brands and companies too, right? It's like, oh, we stand in solidarity, but it's like, and that's like the extent of the message, but it's like, okay, but what have you done, and how have you been complicit in these systems, and what are you going to do to combat that, right? It's not enough just to say like I stand in solidarity, and like, you know, Eric, to your earlier point, like that is performance, right? It's not doing the hard work of being like, shit, I've actually benefited from, you know, racism and like or systemic racism and like in all of these ways, and here is what I'm going to do with that privilege moving forward.
Mm-hmm. To that point, like I think Angela, you and I kind of discussed it, and then all of a sudden my eyes opened where someone had posted something on the line of like, oh, people are just like putting up signs with like just putting out a box and saying, oh, I support Black Lives Movement, and that's just so that their windows don't get busted. And literally, I live right by a place that like posted, I support the Black Lives Movement, and like that was it. It literally was like something printed out, and I wanted to bust their window because like I'm like, that's bullshit. I mean, I read that that's bullshit, and you only posted it because you don't want your shit destroyed. And that's how my sentiment goes a lot with like my friends, or like just holding the accountability of the people around me. I'm like, you love me, but you're just surfacely saying like, hey, in the past, I supported you. You remember that one time that I had your back? Like it's kind of like the things that you've done, but like, what are you doing now? And it's like you're just trying to protect yourself surfacely, being like, I support your cause.
Yeah.
What am I doing to like get there, or like just staying on the fact that like, oh, there's nothing I can do besides post the sign, because the sign just basically speaks for itself. When there are things that you can be doing.
I agree. I find, you know what, like that particular thing, like I was walking through downtown San Diego not too long ago, and I saw signs in the window, and I find myself getting incredibly cynical, and that's just an instance of it. But I do feel cynical in some ways about disingenuous expressions of support around this movement that are happening right now, and because I'm like, you wouldn't need to post that sign if you were about it all this time. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, so, but that's also something that like I'm struggling with, like I'm conflicted with. I'm like, there's definitely that is going on, like that. There's disingenuous support from brands, storefronts, like that is in their own. It's like super in my own self-interest, because I want to protect my livelihood, I got employees who are of color, and if I don't do this, they're gonna feel like I don't support them. And it's like, I think what's tough for me is like I don't know what to believe right now, because so much of it feels like people may be doing things because their arms are twisted. And like to the point you were making before, like last week, where you're like, well, I'm not really, it's difficult to be optimistic about real change. And I'm like, that's when you'll really see, it's like time will tell who stays on the path and then does the work and makes the accommodations to say, or walks the walk, so to speak, so that, in 6 months from now, it's like, I don't care about the sign from when and now. Maybe we should go on a window bust in 6 months from now to be like, who didn't fucking follow through?
Yeah.
Bust all those windows.
Listen, don't tempt me.
We just put a pin in it. We'll put a pin in it. Put it on a calendar, set an Apple reminder.
I'm like, oh, I see you. So you give me a discount? No, I'm just playing. But I'm just saying, like, what are you actually doing? And to that point, like, I agree. And I think that's the accountability that I'll hold of my friends. And I was actually having a talk with someone earlier where it's just like, what's the line of me, like, appreciating and like cheering my white friends for having these hard conversations with like, their loved ones, or telling me like, hey, how are you? And I'm like, oh my God, I appreciate you so much for texting me. Thank you. You're the greatest, like hyping them up just to hype me up, it's just like, when is it okay to be like, all right, but like, do better, do more. Like,
I don't think we need to cheer people on for being decent human beings.
Yeah, and it literally is embedded in us, though. I mean, at least in me, to like cheer them on and be like, oh, like we've been friends for so long. I appreciate the sentiment, but deep down, I'm like, yo, cool, all right, like, keep going.
I've always said this: you're nicer than I am as a person, so it's like it is in your personality to want to take care of people and like cheer them on. I have a more hardline approach to life, so like for me, I'm just kind of like, I expect that. Like if you want to call yourself an ally, I expect that shit from you, and like fucking step up, and like then we can talk about it. Like it's just like, I don't know how to tell people they need to care about others. I don't know how to tell people you need to just be a decent fucking person. And like, you don't necessarily get a gold star for coming up to base level with that shit. And it's like, for me, I think I'm just I'm a very cynical person. I'm just less willing to give props out for that.
I think the problem lies in like, if you like, because you posted a black square, or because you donated $100 or whatever you did that made you feel good, if you can wrap all that shit up and put it in a little box and like put it aside, and then you feel good about that, like that's not enough. That's how you that's not enough. Like, and I've had that struggle with myself, like, oh, I don't want to go on Instagram anymore, it's stressful, but how the fuck does the black community feel? Like, it's not about me. It's not about my stress. It's not about my anxiety. It's not about me crying. What am I doing? What did I do yesterday? What am I doing today? What am I going to do tomorrow, a year, 10 years from now? Like, that's the shit that matters. Don't don't wrap it all up, put it in the backseat, forget about it, and then maybe once in a while you look back at it, like, no, like, it's continue forever.
I love that. It's real.
Yeah.
This
And I
isn't
mean,
just
like,
a train you can hop on.
exactly. Because, I mean, today, pretty much all of the people that talked about this, like, they've all dropped off from my timeline on Instagram. Like, there's nothing now. It's like radio silence, you know, after a week. But, like, this has been going on for 400 years, you know? So, like, what the hell?
Interesting. I've seen it too, where I'm just like, you're gonna watch my stories, you know you're gonna get some black shit. But like that's how I've always been. You know what I mean? I feel like anybody who watches my stories are like, oh yeah, like I love us and I love me. And like I didn't love me at some point in my life. You know what I mean? And like for me, I highlight more darker skin than people because like I myself have my own privilege and my own little small niche. And for me, like people who are darker than me are beautiful. I find them stunning. And like there's this identity, you know, that is even like when you look at me at surface level, there's someone lower than me. And I hate that feeling because I feel like shit. So it's just like, how do we kind of just keep building each other up? And I think that's where I'm struggling. Is like, how do we uplift each other, everyone in here? How do we put ourselves at the same level? But then everyone who feels like they're up here, like bring their ass down too. So it's like, we're working like this. And it's a long game. It's gonna take a while for us to all get there.
And we're gonna, Jojo, I feel the same way you do. Like I follow Ryan Davis comedy, and he was talking about like why is it that Black people can't just stick together and have our own thing? And he talks about walking into a Mexican restaurant and he's like, y'all got Sprite? They're like, nope, we got Topo Chico. Like, when are you gonna get Sprite? We're not. He goes, cool, I'll take that. He walks into like a convenience store. Like, y'all got Windex? Nope, we have Fabuloso. When y'all gonna get Windex? We're not. He's like, Black people don't do that. We adhere and we conform and we adopt other people's shit all the time. Why can't we be like other cultures and keep our stuff and tell y'all, you're not getting what you want? And I loved that. And he goes, I don't care. I will love the hell out of all of us for us. And I like that so spoke to me because I was like, we don't, it's not that we don't have anything, but we don't have anything because we were never given the opportunity to get something. Like we still fight to have our own thing and other cultures can, and no one says anything about it. And it's frustrating. So yeah, Jojo, like I'm with you. I'm gonna love the hell out of us until the day I die.
To your point, like I think, and I learned it a long time ago, so I kind of forget, but I think about like the Chinatowns and the Koreatowns and like, you know what I mean? Like how they were forced to this one part of, and I'm gonna go back to San Francisco, how they came here on a false reality, like, oh, gold mining and all this other stuff, and they were forced to this one fucking neighborhood. And guess what's still fucking standing? That neighborhood. You know what I mean? Whether it's like impoverished, whether it's like not the greatest, whether it's a tourist attraction, they still have a fucking community. And you know what? They band together, they stick together, they work together. And I think about us, and it's like, what do we have? We had the fucking projects, we had the slums, we had the ghetto. And that shit, I don't want to say we allowed, but that shit got pulled up. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But I think we should also contextualize it to say, like, anytime we did have a community that was prospering throughout history, it was destroyed.
It was destroyed.
I think there's also like paralleled with, well, and also to say we haven't band together. I feel like the reason we actually all enjoy freedoms in America is because Black people did band together for everybody.
Well,
so
I mean,
I feel like there's two parallels there where it's like we built those communities, they were destroyed, so that then instills a certain level of fear. And then there's even like articles that I've been reading about how anytime there was like business owners who got successful, they would get lynched. So there was like literal fear of like success, literal fear of those things as we like came about, also controlled by the Eurocentric values.
Don't forget though that like African Americans, like Black people in America, were robbed of culture in its entirety. Mm-hmm. There was no culture. We took on the last names of our slave owners, or were handed them. So Black people in this country don't. If you are a descent of a slave, you do not have a historic culture to tie back to. We don't have a tie back to Africa. You don't have a tie back to like the dissenting of your ancestry. It's a messy mix of American culture in this country. And so I think there's more culture where in places like a Chinatown or a Latino community, that there's more ties back to those cultures, and that doesn't exist. Like that does exist in some subcultures in America. Ethiopian culture that lives in America, like those people have strong ties to their cultural history. Even like Creole, right, which is still messy, but still like deeper ties to their cultural history. Like we don't, for the most part though, like the African American experience is like devoid of a cultural history to have. We were sort of handed a way of living because of slavery in the country. So I think a lot of those things never had a foundation to begin with. It won't even like take it away with. It's sort of like a messy American culture.
We didn't even get 40 acres and a mule. I mean,
no.
Period.
And they took that away.
I can't. But like, kind of like wrapping it back to what I was saying, where it's just like, even being in San Diego when I first got here, I'm like, where are the Black people? Like, I didn't know that there were so many subgroups of Black people, entrepreneurs in tech and resources and sports or whatever. Like, I didn't know like there was a movement going on until I had to like dive in deeper. And then I found like, oh my God, there's so many niches, but everyone's doing something different. And like, that's what I'm saying, like in other communities, there's like, they're together, they're here. And like, we are up here trying to be like, okay, well, these people are beneath us, so we're just gonna do our own thing. And like, those people are doing their own thing, we're gonna do something else over here. And it just like kind of just dolls back into like our own identity. And until both of yours points, it's just like, when will we just say, fuck all that, like band together? And I think like, it just comes from like us not having shit, creating shit, and then feeling bad about having shit. So it's like, it's like this, like, I'm gonna just do this in secret and like not involve other people and like all that shit together. And we just have a long way to go. And I just want it to be to where like we can have our own community, or like have our own street, or have our own block, or have our own fucking neighborhood without it being a fucking big deal or it being gentrified. I will never fucking forget living in Bed-Stuy, and Bed-Stuy maybe like 2016, before I moved here, and seeing there was like white people tours in the neighborhood. Oh, this is Do the Right Thing Way. This is where they filmed Spike Lee's film, and this is where Biggie used to live. Dead ass. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it just became this like highlight, and instead of it just being like, this is our culture, this is something that we can actually internally celebrate. I lived on Malcolm X Boulevard and like didn't think two shits of it until I left. I'm like, wow, I lived on Malcolm X Boulevard. I was going to Spike Lee's block party every year where he celebrated his own successes, and Prince and Michael Jackson. It's just like, those are the things that you don't take into consideration, because we're just like, it's gonna go away in 2 days. I think it's a bigger topic of like, how do we make this shit everlasting?
Mm-hmm.
That's where I feel like Black people are lacking. And that's my TED Talk. Thank you.
Oh.
Anybody else have anything to say?
That was like
any words of wisdom?
I mean, I think the conversation is going to continue. I think these are important, and I'm so glad that we brought in like 3 other perspectives, because they are important. And I think ultimately we're all trying to get to the bigger goal and the bigger purpose of just like to be united, but we're just asking to start with us, like to figure that out, Yeah,
and I think tying it back to kind of the general sentiments of this conversation is just that like, this is ongoing work, right? With ourselves, with our communities, with policies, like, and this is a marathon, not a sprint. And I think it's going to be exhausting. It's going to be a lot of hard work, and it's going to require a lot of us. And like, I think it's important to hold ourselves accountable and hold the people around us accountable, right? And like, not not uh, not put that burden on ourselves to educate others, and like or to do the work for them, right? More importantly, I think it's important to have the dialogue, to have the conversations after they've done the baseline work,
Yeah.
and to further that, and to have those discussions, basically. But like, I think we as individuals need to keep it going, keep it moving, and like start somewhere, right?
Yeah. To that point, we have one question from Andre Wilkinson. He asks, what do you guys feel about the educational aspect to straighten the community for future generations, not just regular schooling, but from an economic standpoint?
Well, yeah, I mean, shit, how much time you got? That's a deep one. We could probably talk for a long time. I mean, like Angel was saying earlier, like institutionally, like our country's sort of founded on an educational system that's devoid of a story that reflects the greater melting pot that is America, and the historic experience of all of those cultures. It is very much American history written by the winners. So I think like that's an issue. I think the communities by which these cultures have been segregated or compartmentalized has been a historic issue, which leads to the funding of the education systems in those communities, which is an issue. But it's a bit of an Ouroboros, right? It's like it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like we set up these communities that are sort of destined to beget the same pattern over and over and over again. And I think it's just fundamental. And I wouldn't even compartmentalize it to just education and like finances. It's just like there's so many fundamental biases built into that system that create this pattern that I think in a lot of ways that's why you start to see why people would just want to burn it all down. In many ways, you know what I mean? They want to burn it all down because it's so ingrained in the system that the only way to get out of it is like one baby step at a time, and that kind of change is going to take 100 years. You know what I mean, to get it to where you want it to be. And I see why people sometimes want to burn a system down. And so there's no silver bullet outside of people changing the way that they think and continuing to change as much as possible every opportunity that they see for improvement, to chase it vigorously and quickly, because otherwise you leave a lot of people living in the fray of like that sort of system that's like set up with bias.
I think to add to that, like the continuing like defunding of the education system is going to only exacerbate all of this, right? And like on top of that, you know, teachers don't have the resources for themselves to educate themselves, let alone to like pass that knowledge forward. And like, you know, all that, like to your point, Andrew, like the victors write history, right? And that is the version that is taught in America to support this narrative of like American exceptionalism, like America is the best, America is the greatest, right? As opposed to looking at our fucking horrific history as it stands in all its like all its horrors. And like I think, you know, that narrative first of all has to change. And you know, that impacts like what goes into textbooks, and impacts like what kind of books or texts that like, you know, teachers are going to teach in their classrooms. And like it's weird because I think back to my education in like elementary school, and like this was a time in San Francisco, like hippie ass San Francisco, pre tech boom San Francisco, where like you know, I distinctly remember in like fourth or fifth grade, like my teacher, who was a Black woman, assigned us a project where we had to pick a Black historical figure, be it an entrepreneur, a doctor, an inventor, whatever, and like basically write a speech from their perspective, kind of highlighting their like achievements and like, you know, notable like accomplishments, whatever. And like I picked Shirley Chisholm. And like, you know, I think that was a very tall ask for a 10-year-old, but like like, first of all, writing a speech when English is your second language, like difficult. And then from the perspective of somebody who isn't like, who you don't even personally relate to, right? But I think the spirit of that kind of exercise needs to come back and needs to be like reintroduced into our education system for there to be knowledge transfer beyond just what textbooks tell us, right? And like I don't know how feasible that is without funding, without changes to systems that, like to what Andrew was describing, just kind of like feed itself and like crumble within itself. And like I am not innovative enough to have a solution to that. I think more creative people are going to need to be the ones to kind of drive the actual change for those things. But I think, like, you know, starts with money and funding.
Yeah.
The point of it not being feasible at the moment. If you're a parent and you're learning right now and you're going through these experiences, teach your children. We can't expect the education system to do all these things. We don't know how that's all set up. I didn't learn about my culture till I went to college, and I chose to take a Chicano studies class. I remember looking at one page with one image with Black slaves on it. And then the rest was pilgrims coming and la-di-da, and we had to go out dressed as a pilgrim and pretend like we're pilgrims. And I'm there like, I don't understand. These people don't look like me, but I'm also not Black, but I'm like, what is going on? But you just have to kind of conform and just, you know, sit there and pretend like you're a pilgrim too.
God, that's such a good point. Like, I remember, you're from San Diego too, right? I don't know if that was a San Diego thing. Like, I had to do that too. And as I got older, I was like, y'all made me dress up as the people that came here to slaughter, like who slaughtered my people. And that was one of the most rude awakenings I have ever had. I'm like, our education system is so broken. Yeah. And it, like Angel said, like, I mean, it comes with funding, but who the hell knows where to start now? Because yeah, I did the same thing. My mom dressing up as a little pilgrim. I remember she was pissed, didn't know why, and went out there with our little shopping cart things, and that's so shitty.
Yeah, I think the thing to remember is like our education system was like literally founded on the idea of building loyal Americans and good workers that come out of our K-12s, right? It's like, and I mean, you can look at the way it's fucking get up at sunup, come home at 3 or 4 in the afternoon. It's like literally modeled after like the working structure of the American farmer, like in terms of like when do you go and do things. And I think the unfortunate miss that we have is that like we have a system that's built on like, to Angel's point, American education set on like, we want people to come out and feel like American exceptionalism. And it's like, what really makes America exceptional is the fact that like, you can be a proud American while critiquing the status of your own country. And like, that's not a luxury that a lot of other countries have. And so, but the problem is our education system isn't oriented around that. And I think that's why we are devoid of learning so much about the truth or all of the nuances, or at least the ugly truths of our history, and the broader like world history that America is literally an aggregate of, ideally, right, as the great melting pot as it was supposed to be.
Totally. Yeah, I can remember this distinct moment. I think it was second grade, and we were learning about some ship, either like the Nina, the Pinto, the Santa Maria, or like the Mayflower or whatever. But it was a picture of like all these white colonists, and the teacher was like, "Hey, yeah, this is where all your ancestors came from." So I went back home, and I asked my mom. I'm like, "Mom, did our family come here on a ship with all the explorers and colonists and stuff?" And she was like, "No, what are you talking about?" And I was so confused. So it is definitely that like Eurocentric educational system. And I'm a young dude. Like this wasn't even that long ago, you know.
Yeah.
But it's just this is such a broken system, like you guys are saying, you know.
I think to. Oh, go ahead.
And say,
No,
they wonder why we're mad. and then they wonder why, you know, we're going through the things that we're going through.
Mm-hmm.
I really hate bringing up this movie because I don't think it was that great, but it just kind of hit home because I recently watched it. Was the movie called The Freedom Riders, and yeah, and I watched it recently, and back then I thought it was a joke, but I was just like how this like white woman who wanted to come teach in this inner city school system, and like she was like, I want to make change, and she's like, I want to do it by like being this white inspirational teacher, and like every like, you know, there's a war against like the Latin community, Black community, like each other, and she was just like, how can I invoke change? So she literally came to like the classroom with the Tupac poem, like a Tupac lyric.
Yeah, I remember that.
And she's literally like, yo, but like here are these notebooks and tell your fucking story and like build your poem, build your life upon your own fucking story. And a lot of people had so much to say. But when I think about like my own history, and again, being in public school, I didn't know I had history. I didn't know I had a fucking story. And it was like, I literally hate bringing it up, but like it was based upon a true story, right? Like she invoked change because she allowed these kids to kind of discover themselves. And it was a lot of homeless kids, impoverished kids, like kids who didn't even know that they fucking mattered. It was in gangs. And they band together and they joined together because they realized they had this commonality. And honestly, I felt like up to K to 12th grade, they were building this systematic oppression against all of us because we only knew the white way, right? And like none of our other stories actually mattered. Mm-hmm. And so I actually like when I watched that, I was like, I'm not saying that all teachers should kind of conform to be that way because she lost a lot, right? Like not everyone wants to give that up, but like you kind of have to dig in deeper like she did and kind of figure out how to find a commonality without being paid shit. You're going to lose a lot. You're going to lose a lot to make this shit work, period. Within it's our families, within it's our friends, within it's our community. And bringing it back to her, she lost a lot to build something bigger and she invoked that change. And I think at the end of the day, like, that's what we're all going to do. We're going to have to lose a lot. We're going to put ourselves in the line. And that's what I talk to a lot of you guys here on this panel about. It's like putting yourself on the line, being authentically yourself, regardless if people are going to accept it or not. You're invoking change. You're inspiring me. You're inspiring a lot of other people just being authentically you. I hate that movie, but I just thought about that.
Yeah. I know we're getting late here, but just a couple more questions from the audience and comments, I guess. Karen Santos says, I just want to thank you all for your truths. I'm really enjoying these conversations from all different racial, cultural, and life experiences. So we'll definitely keep having these conversations. And Matt Surowich from Basic, what's up, Matt? He says, what advice would you give to a child or wish was given to you as children of mixed race marriage? And this question is for Erwin, Andrew, and Lindsay.
I'll go.
It's a good question.
Advice. I don't know. That's a deep one. I would say like, I wish that I would have had, maybe not advice. I wish that I would have had more Sorry, I moved my Zoom meeting. I wish that I would have had more conversation and dialogue about identity as a child, because I think that's something I struggled a ton with. You know, being a person who, I grew up away from my immediate family. Like, I mean, outside of my nuclear family, I was an only child. I grew up in a predominantly white community with, you know, a smaller culture of like Black people. I didn't feel like I ever fit in with anybody. I always felt different, and not necessarily always in a bad way. I just always felt different. And I would say that like it was definitely a subject that was on my mind, and I didn't talk a lot about it because I truly don't feel like I feel like my parents felt like the culture that they moved me away from in Cleveland, that they had dealt so deeply with in their lives, that was so profoundly impactful in their lives. I feel like they got me in a better situation than they did, but that didn't sort of cure the subtle struggles that I had with my own identity and trying to understand, where did I belong? Who was I? What's my background? I grew up devoid of probably a ton of just like cultural tradition, because I lived in a melting pot of a family. I grew up away from my mom. My mom is one of 9 children, and we moved away from all of them. So until I was a little bit older, you know, it was just us. It was like my mom, my dad, and me. And I think that I definitely just struggled a ton with identity. And I don't think that I would have necessarily wanted advice, but what worked a lot for me growing up and what went a long way was just talking about tough subjects so that I knew how to think about them and think critically about them. And I didn't do a lot of that. And some of that, you know, is me not asking. You know, some of that is me as a kid, like not feeling comfortable. But I think knowing what I know now, and knowing that regardless of who I choose to be with, I will be the father of a mixed race child, most likely. Actually, 100% likely. 100% likely. I think it's something that I will talk about. Like, it's something that I will talk about is your identity, and how do you feel about the cultures of your friends? Does it like what? Just have a conversation, because it's messy. It is, and I think it would have been easier to navigate. And like, I've gone through therapy in my older life, and I look back on it, and it's like, it's amazing how I've connected, how it shaped who I am in so many ways. So I think that those things were painful at times, and I would look to, with my future like children, like have those conversations at least.
Andrew and I lived very parallel lives as children, it seems like. And I've talked to him about this a few times. I think the advice I would want to give is more so to the parent than the child. Your child does not know what they're about to face. They do not know the discrimination that they are about to feel. They do not understand that they know mom is this and dad is that. And that's all they know. They don't care that I didn't care that my mom was biracial and my dad was Black. It didn't matter to me. And I didn't talk to my mom about the racism that I was starting to feel in school. I didn't talk to my mom about the microaggressions that I was feeling. I just thought, this is just what I do. And so because I didn't talk to my mom about it, she didn't know it was happening. So I think my advice is more so to the parent, like, talk to your children about the things that may come when they're in school, when they're on the playground. You know, I was absolutely called the N-word, and it knocked me on my butt. And I didn't tell my mom that till I was probably late teens, early 20s, because I didn't know how to talk to my mom about it, you know? So just make sure that you're identifying maybe what your children might be going through. And on the flip side of that, for the children, just be authentically you. You are you. You don't have to fit on one side or the other. You don't have to, you know, try really hard to be Black or try really hard to be white or whatever mixed race you are. You just are authentically you. Because for a long time, and I talked to Andrew about this yesterday, I was a predominantly white school until I was in middle school. I was one of 8 Black kids, but in my group, I was the only Black child. And then I got to high school and then it completely flipped. And for a long time, I didn't feel like I was Black enough. I did not feel like I was Black enough to sit at the table because I didn't have those experiences. I didn't have those friends. And I did not grow up with my father. So I did not know the entire Black side of my family. I had my grandfather, but he did not live with us. So I didn't know anything about my culture until I got to high school. And then it was just like a crash course in learning. So just be authentically you, and it is okay to be mixed. You do not have to feel like you have to fit in one category or the other because you're not supposed to. Your parents had you and they loved you, and that's that. So just parents, talk to your children about what they may be feeling.
Yeah, and I would just echo the same things, honestly, they said. And even though JoJo keeps saying I'm like mixed, I am, my grandma is Filipino. And my grandma is half Filipino at that. And then my other grandma on the other side is actually half Black and half white. So I would say I'm as mixed as a lot of Black people who you would just consider like Black people in America, right? But for me, what allowed me to be, I guess, who I am and where I got to was that my family rooted me in my history from a very young age. They knew I was not going to get it. And they knew that if I was a child and a Black child and a Black man, and I didn't know my history, then I can be told any story about my people and I would follow that story. So I would literally just sway with the wind and sway with the media and sway with other people's opinion. Like I've heard people say the N-word and it didn't have an effect on me other than me being upset at that person, but it didn't have an effect on me because I was prideful in my Blackness and proud of my Blackness. I used to walk around high school with my fist in the air because I was so proud of my Blackness, my history, my heritage, the fact that my great-grandfather my great-grandfather was an actual like escaped slave who then ended up owning land in the South. Like knowing these pieces of my history just made me so proud of being Black that it's like, you can call me all you want, but I'm like, I'm proud as fuck of like my Blackness all day. And it wasn't until I actually came out here that I started meeting Filipino people and like making Filipino friends. And then I started learning about that side of my history. And then now there's like an extra added piece of pride. And so if you're a mixed child and you actually teach your child about the history of both sides and you root them in the power of the history of both sides, you're just it's like a whole new being, like Andrew was saying. It's a whole new experience that this person is having, but now they're coming with the power of both stories. And when I say power of those stories, it's not to say don't teach them about the negative sides. My family taught me about the negative sides, but they taught me about like being Black, there was beauty in all of the adversity. Like to me, that's one thing I root all of my like everything I do in is like every time there was pain and struggle, there was the creation of beauty. There was the pushing of beauty and beautiful things came out of our culture, even through all of that stuff. And so to me, it's rooting them in like Lindsay was saying, rooting them authentically in who you are as people, digging into your histories as individuals, knowing your lineage, knowing your story, knowing the power in your story, and teaching them that power and not hiding from it. And then also educating them on the things that they're going to have to go through so that they're prepared, but they're prepared with power, not with fear.
That's so beautiful. Thank you.
And in response to that, real quick, Thomas Taylor says, I'm able to empathize with you guys, not because I'm mixed, but I've often been told I'm not Black enough or I'm a white kid.
Oh.
Yeah, and I think to the point that Lindsay was just making though, like to even back up what she was saying, it's just I think it's a good point to remember. You know, you don't need to be either of those things. You just need to be you, and that's good enough. And I agree with what even Erwin, you know, like to Erwin's point, it's just like the more you're armed with about who you are, the more you can take and embrace from and embellish and like all of those cultures that make you up. And it's like, it's an empowering thing. You're like, oh, I'm all of these amazing things, because all of these cultures that we're talking about, everybody here has like these, how amazing is every story anybody's ever told. They talk about 23andMe and they never knew about their culture, and they go and dig into it. And it's like, they're all beautiful. They all have these amazing, beautiful, rich histories. It's only bad when you're robbed of it. And that's the important part, is like so many people are robbed of it, you know. And I think that's sometimes what happens, especially like in mixed cultures too. Like you somehow lose out on some of that. Like the mixing of those cultures doesn't mix. It just sort of, they negate.
You pick one,
or you pick one, or you grow up in a culture where it's like the thing we were talking about before, you sort of lean one way or the other, you know, just for whatever reason. So yeah, I think it's just important to like learn a little bit about like what your culture is, as well as others, so that you can appreciate the other ones out there too.
But even to like dig in deeper than that, because relating to like you, Gladys, Lindsay, you guys' story, or I hear Erwin now, and it kind of reminds me of myself, where it's like, it starts with your parents, and it starts with the education at home. And if I didn't know about Kwanzaa, and like my mom didn't make us celebrate Kwanzaa, which again, being a Black kid, also a Black Muslim kid, I didn't know what Kwanzaa was, because our school system never taught us that. And my mom was like, okay, you have to write this fucking essay, find a book, find a person, write an essay about that person and figure it out. And it's like, if it wasn't for that piece of it, I wouldn't be as empowered as I am today. And it like relating back to the question, was like the light skin versus dark skin. It's like, because we still have so much that we need to dive into, because when you think about who the leaders of the Black community is, typically they are light skinned. So there is this kind of like battle between like, well, the dark skinned people are never heard. Again, I had never even heard of who Marcus Garvey was, but I knew who Malcolm X was. And like, what's the difference between them two? They're both very radical ass opinions, but why did I not hear about this person? And so diving in a little bit deeper, again, it's coming from the root of being at home and your comfortability at home. And I have a daughter, I have a 4-year-old, she's about to be 4. And like, it's important for me to put her around Black community, for her to see Black figures, for her to have Black Barbie dolls. I grew up as a kid, and like, you know, when we had these fake fingernails, they were all like white fingernails with red nail polish. I'm like, this ain't my hand, but like, this is who I should, you know what I mean? Like,
I remember those.
Right, and it's like digging in deeper. And I think, again, our parents took a huge step, breaking the barriers of having biracial kids. But when you had the biracial kids, you're like, I made this barrier. What the fuck do I do with it now? And it's up to us as a generation to take it that step further and be like, this is what we're going to do with it now. We're going to educate people beyond us. It's like, everyone comes from a background that's not just Black. I'm sure I do too. And it's like, again, I'm not light skinned, I might not be dark skinned, I might not be straight from Africa, but there's these roots, and we should be proud of these roots, and we should also pass these roots on. Yeah. Because I don't want to just acknowledge there might be some European side of me, because, you know, I don't get turned down in a lot of privilege that I have being this complexion, but it's understanding a little bit more of like where this all comes from. What can we do as the generation now, trying to help the next generation, who's, I actually think they're way far above us, because they're calling their parents out easily. They don't give a fuck. They're like, yo, my dad's racist. I would never outwardly say that, but they're doing that. So it's like, what can we learn from that generation? How can we be more bold? How can we skip the kind of fear that our parents instilled into us, and knowing what we know today, push that forward? And it literally, this is the generation, this is us, this box right here, having this conversation today, taking this step forward, and keep pushing that out. It literally starts from us. That's how I feel. But for real, I definitely think we all have our insecurities. I definitely have my insecurities. Again, I mentioned before, like last week coming into this, I was scared too. And now just organically talking, I'm like, I can just have these conversations with people, and you guys care. People care. We just feel like they don't give a fuck. And again, it's because they don't know. We fear what we expect other people to like have a reaction. they don't need to have a reaction, but you're sharing your own stories. And I think everyone's stories on here was very unique and relatable, even though we all come from different backgrounds.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh. Yep.
Educate your kids. Don't rely on K through 12. Do your shit. Don't forget, your schooling comes at home. It's only part of it. Like, don't rely on that K through 12 to teach your kids who they are or what they need to know, because otherwise you're just gonna get a bunch of drones coming out of the box system. You know what I mean? You don't want that.
Yes.
Like, to that point, like, even at the end of the day, if education was way better and they did teach all about the history and all that stuff, it's like, still teach your kids about your history. Like, each one of our individualized histories is going to be completely different. Like, my story is going to be different than another Black person's story. So just learning broad Black history also is not going to prepare your child to write their own narrative. They need to know their platform and their roots to write their own narrative moving forward.
Absolutely. I can't wait for Nora to go to her teacher and be like, my mama said you were wrong.
And my daughter is more light. She's lighter than me. And she's like, again, I learned from her, because where I am now, as outspoken as I am now, I was not this until I felt like I had the platform. Like, that little girl is going to change some shit. But not just her, like her generation. Like, every time I go to her daycare and I pick her up, her friends offend me. And I'm just like, you know what I mean? But like, they're speaking their own truth and they're not afraid to. I didn't instill that in her. She came out, I guess, seeing me like that. And like, I can't say like I saw my mom be this way, because I really be like, oh, I'm just like my mom. I feel like we're all at this point as an adult, we're like, oh, I'm just like my parent. But like, we had to train ourselves to be this way, when like kids now are just that. They are this fucking way. And now is the time to kind of help form them and lead them and guide them to like be a better this way, because I know I'm a little loose at the mouth and I don't want her to be that way. But like, again, like, it starts at home. Be free, say what you need to say, express yourself. Don't hold that back. Stop beating your child for having a fucking opinion, but like, figure out how to groom that into a better narrative for the next generation. I hate when y'all go silent. Can y'all not?
Agreed.
Processing everything.
Good points.
Yeah. So, moral of the story:
jump in
defund the police and fund education.
Yes. Yes. All day.
Period.
Agreed. Put the money into the next generation. That's what I'm saying.
Yep, 100%.
Well, Jojo, you said you didn't know if you could do this for 2 hours. Look at you.
I did it.
Time just flew by. Holy shit.
Yeah. Are there any more questions?
If there are,
That is it.
answer them on the next one.
I gotta pee.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right. So
I've had a lot of wobbly pops. I need to go pee.
if anybody's on there, they can tune in again next week. We'll be doing this next Friday.
Well, till next time.
Next time.
Thanks for tuning in.
Peace.
Damn, JoJo dropped off quick.
Goodbye.